Arthur Griffin's augmetic leg clicked against the worn plastic floor as he knelt before his household shrine, the sound echoing in the pre-dawn quiet of Hab Block 7, fourth hour of the day cycle on Benediction Prime, and already the familiar ache had begun. 15 years since the greenskin power claw had taken his leg below the knee. 15 years since the Mechanicus had blessed him with steel and servo. And still, the phantom pain came when the acid rains fell. Through the window, he could hear the drops hissing against the anti-corrosion coating, each a tiny prayer of dissolution. "Emperor, grant us the strength to see your enemies," he whispered, fingers moving across prayer beads. Each bead had been inscribed with microscopic verses from the Lectitio Divinitatis, the work of 3 years' savings and 6 months on a waiting list at the Ecclesiarchy's scriptorium. Grant us the courage to stand against them. Grant us the fury to destroy them utterly. Behind him, Maddie fastened the brass clasps of her work coat, each one stamped with the aquila of her manufactorum guild. 22 years they'd been married, since before his conscription into the PDF, before the leg, before the nightmares that still came when the darkness pressed too close. She moved with the grace of someone who'd learned to navigate their Hab's confined spaces without disturbing the accumulated detritus of a life together. His service medals in their felt-lined case, her apprenticeship certificates from the vestment works, Bailey's childhood drawings of the Emperor smiting Xenos, now faded but still treasured. "You're up early again," Maddie said, not quite managing to hide the concern in her voice. "Third time this week. Couldn't sleep." Arthur didn't turn from the shrine, where the icon of the god emperor seemed to watch him with eyes that had been painted in real gold leaf, a wedding gift from Maddie's mother before she died. The votive candles, made from sanctified Grox tallow, flickered, casting shadows that danced across the emperor's painted wounds. "The new families. I know." She touched his shoulder, her fingers finding the knot of scar tissue where shrapnel had nearly severed the deltoid muscle. Bailey noticed it too. None of their children attend youth ministry. She tried to invite them personally. Arthur stood, his leg servo whining in the B-flat tone that meant it needed maintenance he couldn't afford until next month's stipend. Through their Hab window, residential block 7 sprawled below in the perpetual twilight of the lower hive, where natural sunlight never reached, and the lumens ran on rationed power that dimmed and brightened according to work shifts. Somewhere out there, behind blackout curtains that had appeared overnight and sealed doors that never seemed to open during normal hours, the Hartley family was doing who knows what. "How many families now?" Maddie asked, moving to stand beside him. She smelled of the lavender oil she dabbed behind her ears each morning, a tiny luxury in a world of industrial stenches. 11, all arrived within the last month. Arthur pulled his data slate from its charging alcove, the screen illuminating with lists of names, dates, and observations recorded in his cramped script. The Hartleys in Block 7, the Thorntons in 5, the Worthingtons in 9, the Grimshaws in 3, 7 more scattered across the district. Maybe they're just private people. Not everyone announces themselves to the neighbors. Arthur turned to face his wife, and after 20 years of marriage, she could read the concern written in the lines around his eyes, deeper now than when he'd returned from the wars. "They don't attend services, Maddie. Not one of them. Not morning prayer, not evening benediction, not even the mandatory feast celebrations. On a shrine world." The weight of that statement hung between them like incense smoke. On Benediction Prime, where the Cathedral Imperialis drew millions of pilgrims annually, where every street corner had its shrine, and every work shift began with the litany of production. Missing weekly devotion wasn't just unusual, it was illegal. To avoid services required either influence or subterfuge. "What will you do?" Maddie moved to the small kitchen alcove, beginning the morning ritual of heating recaf on their single-burner stove. The bitter smell filled the Hab, mixing with the incense from the shrine. "What I've always done." Arthur retrieved his watch coat from its hook, the fabric worn but meticulously maintained, its brass buttons polished to mirror brightness. The badge of office, a stylized eye superimposed over the district grid, caught the candlelight. She turned from the stove, and in her eyes he saw the same fear that had been there when he'd shipped out to fight the greenskins, when he'd returned missing a leg, when he'd taken the volunteer position that everyone knew meant becoming the district's unofficial investigator. "Be careful, please. I'm always careful." "No," she said quietly, "you're always dutiful. There's a difference." Before he could respond, Bailey emerged from her small room, already dressed in her acolyte robes. At 17, she had her mother's delicate features, but her father's penetrating gaze. The white fabric of her ministry vestments seemed to glow in the dim light, and the purity seals attached to her belt rustled with each movement. "Morning prayers?" she asked, though she knew the answer. They hadn't missed morning prayers as a family in 5 years. They arranged themselves before the shrine, and their voices rose together in the hymn of awakening, the words as familiar as breathing. But even as Arthur sang the ancient verses, his mind was elsewhere, parsing patterns and anomalies, the soldier's instinct that had kept him alive, now screaming that something was terribly wrong in District Sanctum 9. 3 nights later, Arthur crouched in maintenance shaft C7, his old PDF field glasses trained on the entrance to the Hartley family's HAB unit. The magnoculars had cost him 6 months' wages back when he could still run, but they'd saved his squad more times than he could count. Now they served a different kind of war. His augmetic leg was locked in position to prevent servo noise. The joint locks engaged with a soft click that seemed thunderous in the enclosed space. He'd been watching for 4 hours, sustained by combat conditioning that let him remain motionless far longer than civilian muscle memory would allow. The chronometer on his wrist, another military relic, showed 0243 when the first movement came, not from the Hartley's door, but from the Thorntons 2 floors up. Then the Worthingtons from Block 9 appeared in the adjoining corridor. Within minutes, 6 of the 11 families had emerged, moving with a synchronization that spoke of planning. At 0247, the Hartley's door finally opened. Marcus Hartley led his family out, and even from 40 meters away, Arthur could see what was wrong with the man's cover story. Hartley claimed to be an administratum clerk, form stamper in the vehicle registry. But his shoulders were too broad, his gait too measured, his head moving in the constant scan pattern that Arthur recognized from his own military service. The man moved like a soldier, trying to move like a civilian and failing. His wife followed, listed as Sarah Hartley, seamstress in the textile district, but her hands were wrong. Arthur had lived with a textile worker for 2 decades. Maddie's hands were clever and quick but soft, marked by occasional needle pricks. Sarah Hartley's hands, glimpsed as she adjusted her hood, were ridged with calluses across the knuckles. Fighters' hands. Then came the children. 3 of them, ages listed as 8, 12, and 14. They moved wrong. Normal children stumbled when woken at odd hours, complained about the cold, dragged their feet. These 3 moved in perfect formation, maintaining exact distances, their footfalls synchronized. The youngest, a girl who should have been clutching a favorite toy or yawning, walked with the alert readiness of a trained sentry. Arthur waited 60 seconds after they passed, then followed. The families converged on the district's industrial quarter, where the manufactorum's night shift thunder drowned out most sounds, and the chemfog from the forges provided visual cover. They descended into Maintenance Station 7, officially sealed after structural failures 5 years ago. Arthur knew better. He'd been studying the district's architectural records in his role as watch coordinator, documents dating back to the hive's construction. Those tunnels connected to the old transit system built before the great collapse of M39. Abandoned but not destroyed, forgotten but not gone. He gave them 5 minutes, then approached the entrance. The lock was a masterwork of deception. Rust patterns that looked decades old, but flaked away at the wrong touch points, revealing metal too clean for its supposed age. The false wall swung inward on hinges that made no sound, recently oiled despite the station's supposed abandonment. Arthur activated his pictricorder, the military-grade device small enough to fit in his palm, but capable of storing hours of high-definition footage. Whatever was down there, he'd need proof. The Arbites wouldn't move on suspicion alone, not in the bureaucratic labyrinth of Benediction Prime's legal system. The tunnel beyond the false wall shouldn't have existed. According to city records, This entire section had been filled with rockcrete after the structural failures. Instead, Arthur found himself in a passage lit by chemical lumens that cast everything in a diseased red glow. The air tasted of rust and something else, something metallic and organic that made his rebuilt leg ache with phantom memory of the field hospital. Voices echoed from deeper in the network, distorted by distance and the tunnel's acoustics. Arthur moved carefully, each footstep calculated, calling on training that his muscles remembered even if his conscious mind had tried to forget. 20 meters in, he found the first sign that made his blood run cold. A crude symbol painted on the wall in what looked like dried blood. A stylized skull atop crossed axes, surrounded by 8 tally marks. Below it, scratched into the metal with something sharp, words in low Gothic. Blood for the blood god. Skulls for the skull throne. 8. The sacred number of Khorne, lord of battles, the brass lord of the skull throne. Arthur knew these names only because knowledge of the enemy was considered essential for senior PDF soldiers. The 4 ruinous powers were humanity's greatest threat, and Khorne was perhaps the most direct. No subtle corruption, no complex schemes, just rage, blood, and the honesty of violence. The voices grew louder as he advanced. Arthur could make out individual words now, training commands, combat doctrine, the sound of weapons being maintained. He reached a junction where 3 tunnels met and carefully peered around the corner. The chamber beyond had been converted into a training arena. The new families, 40 or 50 people, practiced combat drills with professional precision. Marcus Hartley supervised one group, correcting stances and strikes with the authority of a drill sergeant. His voice carried clearly. Strike 8 times, then reset. Always 8. The blood god demands precision in your fury. But it was the children that turned Arthur's stomach. In one corner of the chamber, kids who should have been learning their letters were instead learning to kill. The 8-year-old Hartley girl faced off against a boy perhaps 10, both wielding dulled combat knives with a skill that spoke of years of practice. They moved through attack patterns that Arthur recognized from PDF close combat training, but modified, made more vicious. Where the PDF taught quick, clean kills, these children were learning to maim, to cause maximum damage. One boy, maybe 12, had eyes as cold as any veteran Arthur had served with. When he struck his opponent, a girl his own age, and opened a gash along her ribs, he showed no emotion. Not satisfaction, not regret. Nothing. The girl didn't cry out, just pressed her free hand to the wound and continued fighting, her blood adding to the stains on the floor. An older man, scarred and massive, watched the children with approval. Every drop of blood shed in training is a prayer to the brass lord. Show me your devotion, he called out. The children attacked with renewed fury. Arthur recorded everything, the picture recorder's machine spirit storing every damning frame. These weren't just heretics. This was a militarized cult, training for war, but war against whom? And when? A woman he recognized as Thornton's wife demonstrated weapons maintenance to a group of teenagers. The weapons themselves made Arthur's jaw clench, military-grade lasguns that should have been locked in PDF armories, autoguns with enlarged magazines and modified stocks for urban combat. Most disturbing of all, chain weapons. He could see at least 3 chain axes and a chainsword, their teeth already darkened with use. Remember, the woman was saying, when the day comes, you aim for maximum casualties. No clean kills unless necessary. The blood god cares not from whence the blood flows, only that it flows. Every scream is a hymn. Every death is a sacrifice. Arthur began to pull back, but then he heard something that stopped him cold. What about the watchdog? One of the men asked. Griffin's been sniffing around. Marcus Hartley laughed. The cripple, he's nobody. A failed soldier playing at being important. If he becomes a problem, we'll deal with him. His daughter would make good practice for the youth brigade, pretty little thing in her white robes. Imagine them painted red. Rage, hot and pure, flooded through Arthur's veins. His hand moved to the last pistol on his hip. He'd started carrying it again, illegally, but some habits died hard. It would be so easy. One shot, one kill, take Hartley's head off and, no, that was the thinking they wanted, violence answering violence. blood calling for blood. Arthur forced his hand away from the weapon and continued his retreat. He had what he needed: evidence, proof. The proper authorities would handle this. But first, he needed to know how deep the corruption ran. Over the next week, Arthur's investigation expanded. Using his watch coordinator credentials, he accessed district records going back years. The pattern was there, if you knew how to look. Families arriving separately but in clusters. Documentation that seemed perfect but contained subtle anomalies. Registration numbers that didn't match the proper sequence. Medical records from clinics that had closed years ago. Employment histories with companies that existed only on paper. He followed different groups on different nights, mapping the tunnel network. It was vast, extending far beyond District Sanctum 9. Someone had spent years, possibly decades, excavating and reinforcing these passages. The scale suggested resources and planning that no simple cult could manage. This was organized, funded, and protected. The worst discovery came when he found their shrine, deep in the tunnel network. Past 3 checkpoints that he barely managed to avoid, Arthur discovered a chamber. The massive space had been converted into a temple that was the antithesis of everything holy on Benediction Prime. The altar dominated the far wall, a grotesque construction of salvaged machinery and human remains. Skulls formed the base, hundreds of them, mortared together with what looked like dried blood. The 8-pointed star of chaos rose above it, forged from brass that seemed to pulse with its own heat. Chains hung from the ceiling, decorated with more skulls and weapons, trophies taken from victims. Arthur recognized PDF combat knives, Arbates shock mauls, even what might have been an Adeptus Astartes combat blade, though he prayed he was wrong. The walls were covered in blasphemous prayers written in dozen languages, all variations on the same theme: blood, skulls, war, and the glory of corn. Weapon racks lined the chamber, enough to arm a small army, and based on what he'd seen, that's exactly what they were building. But it was the pit that made him truly understand what he was dealing with. The floor had been excavated into an arena 20 meters across, its surface dark with layers of old blood. The walls bore thousands of tally marks arranged in groups of 8. This wasn't just a training ground. This was a killing floor. Ritual combat, fights to the death, blood sacrifices to their dark god. Arthur was documenting the weapons when he heard footsteps, multiple sets, approaching fast. He'd been discovered. Arthur ran, his augmetic leg pumping as Lars' fire erupted behind him. The cultists had found his trail, and now the hunter had become the hunted. Red bolts of death scorched the air where he'd been moments before, and voices roared battle cries. Blood for the blood god. Skulls for the skull throne. His old PDF Lars pistol was in his hands before conscious thought, muscle memory taking over. Return fire, 3 shots, displacement. One cultist went down screaming. Keep moving. Another junction, another decision. Left led toward the surface but through established cult territory. Right went deeper but might offer more cover. A chain axe roared to life somewhere behind him, its distinctive shriek echoing through the tunnels. They were bringing out the serious weapons now. Arthur chose right, plunging deeper into the darkness. These passages followed standard template construction. If he could find a maintenance shaft, it should lead to there, a rusted grate that his augmetic leg kicked through with enhanced strength. Arthur dove through as autogun fire stitched the wall behind him. The shaft was barely wide enough for his shoulders, but it slowed his pursuers too. The shaft opened into an abandoned hab level, one of thousands that honeycombed the hive's structure. Arthur oriented himself quickly, north by the air flow, down by the gravity. He needed to reach the surface, needed to get his evidence to someone who would listen. But first, he had to survive. 3 cultists burst from another entrance, having circled around faster than he'd anticipated. Arthur's lasgun spoke first, dropping one with a headshot that painted the wall behind with boiled brain matter. The second cultist's auto-pistol barked, rounds sparking off Arthur's augmetic leg. The third charged with a screaming chain axe. Arthur met him halfway, kicking the cultist with his mechanical leg in his sternum with a crack of breaking bone. A point-blank Lars shot ended the threat permanently. The second cultist had reloaded. Arthur rolled behind a fallen support beam as bullets chewed the rockcrete. He counted shots, 8, then a pause, always 8 with these madmen. In the pause, he rose and fired. The cultist's chest became a burning hole. More footsteps. Too many. Arthur ran again, his leg beginning to protest with grinding sounds. The Mechanicus-blessed machinery was durable but not invincible. He'd been pushing it hard. A familiar voice echoed through the passages. Griffin, you're just delaying the inevitable. We own this district. Half the arbites are ours. The administratum clerks who process your reports, ours. Even some of the priests who preach the false emperor's lies. They know the truth, might makes right, blood makes pure, join us or die. Arthur saved his breath for running, but Hartley's words confirmed his worst fears. The corruption went all the way up. Normal channels would be useless. He needed something else, something they couldn't intercept or subvert. The memory came like a prayer answered. Deep Fox transmitters. Emergency broadcast systems hardened against invasion, hidden throughout the hive, maintained by the Mechanicus and accessible only with military codes. His PDF clearance might still work, if he could reach one, if he could survive that long. The next morning, Arthur sat in the Arbites precinct, his freshly printed report in hand. The desk sergeant, the same board functionary as always, didn't look up from his data slate. I need to speak with Captain Brenner. It's urgent. File a report. Form 77B. Processing time is currently 8 to 12 weeks. This can't wait that long. Arthur leaned forward, placing the report on the desk. There's a cornate cult operating in. Unsubstantiated accusations require Form 77C, the sergeant interrupted, still not looking up, with supporting documentation in triplicate. Picked evidence must be verified by the tech priests, minimum 4-week waiting period. Character references from 3 citizens of good standing. Next. Did you hear what I said? A chaos cult. Corn worship. They're armed and... Sir. Now the sergeant did look up, and his eyes were cold. Are you making an accusation without proper documentation? That's a violation of Statute 447B. I could have you arrested for wasting Arbites resources. Arthur stared at the man, looking for some sign. Was he one of them? Or just another bureaucrat who didn't care? It was impossible to tell, and that was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. He left the precinct, frustration burning in his chest. His 3rd attempt this week, same result. The ecclesiarchy had been worse. They'd referred him to a subcommittee that met quarterly to review concerns of spiritual nature. The PDF wouldn't accept civilian reports without Arbites confirmation. Every door he tried led to another wall of paperwork and procedure. That evening, Arthur sat with Bailey in the chapel after her youth ministry session. The chapel was quiet, only a few elderly faithful maintaining their vigil before the altar. His daughter wore her acolyte robes with pride, the white fabric pristine despite the day's work with the younger children. "Father, why do you look so troubled?" she asked, arranging prayer candles for the evening service. Each candle had to be placed precisely, the patterns forming sacred geometry that focused the faithful's devotions. He wanted to protect her from the truth, but she was 17, old enough to understand danger, old enough to need warning. "Bailey, have you noticed anything unusual about the new families?" She paused in her work, then nodded slowly. "They're children. When I tried to invite them to services, they looked at me like..." She searched for words. Like the feral dogs in the waste zones look at prey. It was wrong, evil. "Stay away from them, promise me." "Father, what's happening? You've been gone at strange hours." Mother prays more desperately each day. The other watch volunteers, whisper that you're investigating something dangerous. Before he could answer, the chapel doors burst open with a bang that echoed through the sacred space. Marcus Hartley entered, flanked by 2 other men from the new families, Thornton and Grimshaw. "Coordinator Griffin," Hartley's voice was casual, friendly even. "We need to talk." Arthur stood slowly, positioning himself between the men and Bailey. His hand drifted toward the concealed Lars pistol under his coat. "This is a holy place. Violence here is..." "Who said anything about violence?" Hartley smiled. We're just concerned citizens wanting to discuss community matters. Your daughter leads the youth ministry, doesn't she? Such important work, shaping young minds, teaching them about sacrifice and duty. The threat was subtle, but clear, delivered with the practiced ease of someone who had made many such threats before. Bailey, go to the vestry, Arthur said quietly. She hesitated, her hand moving to the small aquila pendant at her throat. She obeyed, but her footsteps were reluctant. Hartley watched her go with an expression that made Arthur's trigger finger itch. Pretty girl, Hartley observed. The kind of purity that the young men in our community would find very interesting, very tempting. You know how young men can be, all that energy, all that aggression, sometimes it needs an outlet. If you touch her, Hartley laughed. We're not degenerates, Griffin, we have discipline, purpose. But accidents happen in the lower hive. People disappear, especially people who ask too many questions, who go places they shouldn't, who see things they weren't meant to see. Thornton had moved to block the main exit. Grimshaw stood by the side door. They'd positioned themselves perfectly, cutting off escape routes without seeming overtly threatening to any casual observer. You've been following us, Hartley continued. That's unneighborly, intrusive. Some might even say heretical, spying on faithful imperial citizens. You don't attend services. That's illegal. Is it? Hartley pulled a data slate from his pocket, showing attendance records. According to this, we attend every week. Signed by Deacon Branner himself. You calling a man of the cloth a liar? Arthur's mind raced. Deacon Branner, one of the chapel's senior administrators. The corruption went that high, into the ecclesiarchy itself. Here's what's going to happen. Hartley stepped closer, and the chemical smell of weapon oil and blood clung to him like a shroud. You're going to stop watching us. Stop following us. Stop asking questions. Forget we exist. Take your pretty wife and prettier daughter and mind your own business. Or, he didn't need to finish. The threat hung in the air like incense smoke. The Emperor protects the faithful, Arthur said. Hartley laughed. The Emperor. The Emperor's 10,000 light years away, corpse-bound to his throne, sucking the life from 1,000 psychers a day just to keep the lights on. But we're right here. We're your neighbors. We shop at the same markets. Our children go to the same scholams, or would if we let them. We're watching you now, Griffin, always watching. They left, but their message was clear. Arthur waited until he was certain they were gone, then found Bailey in the vestry. She was clutching her prayer beads, her knuckles white. We need to leave, she said. Tonight, Mother and us, we can go to the upper hive. I have a friend whose family. No, Arthur's voice was firm. They want me to run, to be silent. But silence is how darkness spreads. Then what do we do? Arthur looked at his daughter, faithful, brave, too young for this burden, but old enough to need the truth. We have faith, and we find someone who will listen, someone they can't corrupt or threaten. Who? Arthur thought of the Deep Fox transmitters, of military frequencies that civilians weren't supposed to know existed. I have an idea, but it's dangerous. More dangerous than doing nothing. She had a point. That night, Arthur told Maddie everything. She listened in silence, her face growing paler with each revelation. When he finished, she stood and walked to their small window, looking out at the district where they'd built their life. 20 years, she said quietly. 20 years we've lived here, raised our daughter, made friends. And now you're telling me half our neighbors are cultists. Maybe more than half. She turned to him, and in her eyes he saw not fear but determination. What do you need me to do? Keep Bailey safe. Act normal. If anything happens to me, nothing will happen to you. She moved to him, taking his scarred hands in her soft ones. Because you're going to be smart about this. You're going to get your evidence to someone who can act on it, and then you're going to come home to us. Understand? He kissed her forehead. I understand. But they both knew he was lying. 2 weeks before the feast of the Emperor's ascension, Arthur made his most dangerous infiltration yet. He'd spent days preparing, studying patrol patterns, identifying blind spots in the cult's surveillance. Tonight, they were all gathering. He'd seen the movement patterns, the convergence of all the family groups toward a central location deep in the tunnel network. He wore stolen cultist robes over his clothes. The rough fabric stank of sweat and blood. His augmetic leg was wrapped in cloth to muffle its mechanisms, though the joints protested with each step. In his pocket, the picture recorder captured everything, its machine spirit blessed with sacred oils he'd taken from the chapel. The main gathering chamber was a vision from the darkest nightmares of the imperial creed. The massive space, once a transit hub from the hive's early construction, had been transformed into a temple to slaughter. The domed ceiling, 50 meters above, was covered in a grotesque constellation of skulls, each one positioned precisely, their empty sockets looking down on the proceedings below. He estimated over 1,000 of them, and those were just the ones he could see clearly. The fighting pit in the center was active. Two cultists, stripped to the waist and armed with axes, circled each other while hundreds of their fellows watched from tiered platforms. Both fighters were already bleeding from multiple wounds, but they showed no sign of slowing. If anything, the blood seemed to energize them. "First blood to Brother Marcus," someone shouted, and the crowd roared approval. Arthur recognized the fighter, Marcus Hartley himself, his torso a map of scars both old and fresh. His opponent was younger, faster, but Hartley had experience and ruthlessness. When the younger man overextended on a swing, Hartley's axe took his arm off at the elbow. The crowd erupted. But the young cultist didn't fall. Instead, he grabbed his severed arm and held it high, blood pouring from the stump. "Blood for the blood god," he screamed. "Skulls for the skull throne," the crowd responded. Hartley ended it with a swing that opened the man's throat. The dying cultist fell to his knees, still trying to speak his god's praise through the blood frothing from his mouth. When he finally collapsed, Hartley raised his axe high, and the crowd's approval was deafening. Arthur kept recording, fighting down the bile in his throat. These people were insane, but it was a focused insanity, a weaponized madness that would tear through unprepared civilians like a chainsaw through cloth. The altar at the far end of the chamber drew his attention. It was even worse up close. The skulls that formed its base weren't all adult-sized. Some were smaller. Dark stains on the altar's surface suggested regular use for blood sacrifice. A figure emerged onto a platform above the altar, and silence fell like a guillotine. Arthur knew him. Everyone in the district knew him. Colonel Crindle, hero of the Morty's Gulf campaign, officially listed as killed in action when his position was overrun by Xenos. His memorial statue stood in Victory Plaza. His name was on the Wall of Martyrs. His widow had received the Star of Terror posthumously on his behalf. But here he stood, very much alive. Crindle had always been a big man, but now he was massive, his frame wrapped in modified PDF armor painted in brass and red. Ritual scars covered his visible skin in patterns, the mark of Khorne etched into living flesh. A chain axe hung at his side, its teeth caked with dried blood that looked like rust. When he spoke, his voice filled the chamber without amplification. "Brothers and sisters in blood," Crindle's words resonated with dark charisma. "The time approaches. 8 days until the feast of the Emperor's ascension. 8 days until we offer the skulls of millions to the throne of skulls." The crowd roared approval, their voices combining into a sound that was barely human. 17 worlds will rise with us," Crindle continued. "From Benediction Prime, the signal will spread across the sector. The false Emperor's shrine worlds will burn, his pilgrims will water the ground with their blood. And from that blood, from that magnificent slaughter, our Lord Khorne will manifest." A cultist raised her hand, Thornton's wife. "What of the watchdog, Griffin?" Crindle laughed, the sound echoing off the skull-covered ceiling. "One crippled veteran, he's nothing. His reports go nowhere, Brother Branner ensures that. The arbites who might listen to him are ours. The administratum clerks who process citizen complaints, ours. Even if he reached the ecclesiarchy's upper echelons, Cardinal Whitehall's secretary is one of us. The old soldier can watch all he wants. When the killing starts, his family will be among the first to fall. I've promised their skulls to my personal guard. The daughter especially, innocence makes the sweetest sacrifice." Rage, pure and burning, flooded through Arthur's veins. He forced himself to keep recording. "The cathedral will be our masterpiece," Crindle was saying. 4 million pilgrims expected for the feast. They'll pack the plaza, the processional ways, every approach to the cathedral. And at the moment of the high benediction, when Cardinal Whitehall raises the sacred icon, he paused for effect. We strike. 48, 8-man kill teams. Explosive charges at the structural points. The cathedral doors sealed from outside. It will be a slaughterhouse. The blood will flow in rivers. The screaming will reach the skies. And the Vox networks will carry it all across the sector, spreading fear and chaos. What of the guard? Someone called out. A regiment is on planet, yes, but their colonel is sympathetic to our cause. He won't be joining us, but he'll be slow to respond. Confused orders. Communication failures. By the time they mobilize properly, we'll have painted the cathedral red and disappeared back into the population. Who will they arrest? We are citizens, veterans, workers, parents. They can't arrest everyone. The plan was brilliant in its brutal simplicity. Arthur could see it working. The feast always strained security to its limits. Add in corrupted officials, delayed responses, and the sheer shock of the attack. Now, Crindle announced, for tonight's blessing. They brought out prisoners. 3 people, bound and gagged, dragged to the altar. 2 men and a woman, all wearing the remnants of ministorum robes. Low-level priests or administrative staff, probably grabbed when they'd noticed something wrong and tried to report it. These false prophets thought to speak against us, Crindle said, drawing a ritual blade that glowed with heat. Let their blood feed our Lord's eternal rage. Arthur couldn't watch what came next. He turned away, but the sounds carried, screaming muffled by gags, the wet sound of blade through flesh. The crowds chanted prayers to their dark god. When he looked back, the altar was drenched in fresh blood, and the 3 bodies were being dragged to the pit. 8 days, brothers and sisters, Crindle concluded. 8 days until we remind this galaxy that might makes right, that blood calls for blood, that the strong shall inherit, while the weak shall serve as stepping stones to glory. Prepare yourselves, sharpen your blades, say your prayers, for Khorne. For Khorne, the crowd roared back. Arthur began his retreat, but he'd seen enough, more than enough. The cult wasn't just planning an attack, they were planning a sector-wide uprising that would cripple the Imperium's hold on the region. And they had the resources, the planning, and the infiltration to pull it off. Getting out proved harder than getting in. The ceremony continued with ritual combat, cultists fighting to the death in the pit while their brothers cheered. The winners claimed skulls for their personal collections. The losers fed the altar's endless thirst for blood. Arthur used the distraction to work his way toward an exit, but at the tunnel entrance, a sentry spotted his awkward gait. They yelled for him to stop. Arthur ran. Shouts erupted behind him. The augmetic leg, blessed by the Omnissiah, pumped faster than flesh ever could, but it was loud now, the stealth wrapping torn away. He knew these tunnels now, had mapped them over weeks of careful exploration, but the cultists knew them better. Lars' fire scorched the air, painting the tunnel walls with burning light. Arthur's old Lars pistol answered, muscle memory guiding his shots. One cultist went down clutching his stomach. Another's head exploded in a spray of superheated blood and bone, but more kept coming. Find him, Crindle's voice roared through the tunnels, amplified by Voxcasters. 8 skulls to whoever brings me Griffin. Make it 16 if you bring him alive. I want to blood him personally. A chain axe roared to life ahead of Arthur. Cultist emerging from a side passage, weapon already swinging. Arthur dropped and slid, his augmetic legs sparking against the floor. The axe passed overhead, teeth screaming. His Lars pistol spoke point blank, and the cultist's chest smoked as he fell dead. Up and running again. More voices were converging. A maintenance hatch, half hidden behind corroded pipes. Beyond was a shaft that dropped into darkness. No time to think. He jumped. The fall was 8 meters. Of course it was 8 with these madmen. Arthur's augmetic leg absorbed the impact with a mechanical scream of protest, servos grinding. Pain shot up his spine, but he was alive and mobile. The shaft had dropped him into a different tunnel section, one that smelled of sewage and industrial runoff. He ran into the darkness, following the flow of sewage toward what had to be a treatment facility. If he could reach it, there might be a way to the surface. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, filled with the thunder of machinery. Ancient pumps the size of battle tanks process the hive's waste, their machine spirits groaning with endless labor. Arthur wove between them, using the noise to mask his movement, but the cultists were close behind, spreading out to cut off exits. He climbed, his augmetic leg protesting with each step. The ladder led to a catwalk, then another tunnel, then finally, Emperor be praised, a door marked with Mechanicus symbols, a maintenance access to the surface levels. The door was locked, but Arthur's PDF override codes still worked. The Mechanicus, at least, hadn't been corrupted. He emerged into a machinery shrine, tech priests looking up in surprise as a blood-splattered, sewage-stinking soldier burst from their maintenance tunnels. Cultists, Arthur gasped. In the tunnels, cornate cult, seal the access. The tech priests moved with surprising speed, mechadendrites extending to slam heavy locks into place. One of them, more machine than man, turned sensor arrays toward Arthur. "Explain," it demanded in a voice like grinding gears. "No time. Need to reach Deep Fox transmitter. Military emergency." The tech priest studied him for a long moment, then pointed with a mechanical arm. "Subshrine 7, 3 levels up. May the Omnissiah guide your purpose." Arthur ran. The bunker was exactly where his military training said it would be, built into the bones of the hive itself. Deep Fox transmitters, hardened against orbital bombardment, hidden throughout the structure for exactly this kind of emergency. Arthur's PDF clearance codes were 15 years out of date, but the machine spirit recognized his biometrics, his service record, his authority. The blast doors sealed behind him just as the first cultists arrived. He could hear chain axes shrieking against adamantine that had been blessed by Mars itself. They'd need heavy mining equipment to break through, and he'd be done before they could retrieve it. Arthur uploaded everything from the pictricorder while simultaneously broadcasting on every emergency frequency the transmitter could reach. Even the legendary Inquisition frequencies that supposedly monitored all Vox traffic for signs of heresy. His message was simple but urgent. Cornate cult embedded in Benediction Prime. Attack imminent during Emperor's Feast. Colonel Crindle leads. Presumed KIA, confirmed alive and corrupted. 17 worlds involved. Documentation attached. Immediate intervention required. The Emperor protects. The responses came within seconds. Authorization codes he didn't recognize. Requests for confirmation. Orders to maintain position and await extraction. The machinery of the Imperium, slow to start but unstoppable once in motion, was awakening. After what felt like an eternity, the cultists breached the door, flooding in. Arthur turned, Lars' pistol raised, ready to die fighting. He'd done his duty. His family would be safe. The cult would be stopped. Then the ceiling exploded in a shower of rockcrete and fire. Drop pods punched through like the Emperor's own fist, their retro-thrusters turning the air into a furnace. Before the cultists could react, hatches blew open and storm troopers emerged, their hellguns painting the bunker in Lars fire. The cultists died before they could scream their battle cries, their bodies reduced to ash and memory. A commissar approached Arthur, who still held his lasgun despite multiple wounds he was only now beginning to feel. The man's uniform was pristine despite having just dropped from orbit, his bolt pistol still smoking from execution shots delivered to ensure the cultists stayed dead. "Coordinator Griffin." The commissar's voice was cultured, educated, nothing like the battlefield raw Arthur expected. "Lord Inquisitor Vandire wants to speak with you, immediately." The purge began within the hour. The Inquisition had been watching, Arthur learned. They'd suspected cult activity, but lacked the evidence to act without risking a sector-wide panic. His investigation had provided the missing pieces. The assault on District Sanctum 9 was surgical in its precision, overwhelming in its violence. Guard regiments that had been stationed in training exercises suddenly mobilized. Valkyrie gunships filled the skies. Arbites units that had been carefully vetted moved against their corrupted colleagues. The tunnels were flooded with promethium and burned, the screams of dying cultists echoing through the hive's bones. Crindle's cult fought with the fury of the damned. They'd activated their cells across the district. turning hab blocks into fortresses, using civilians as human shields. They detonated prepositioned explosives, collapsing entire sections of the hive. They released combat stims into their own bloodstreams, fighting long past the point where normal humans would have died. It didn't matter. The hammer of the Imperium, once raised, fell with inexorable force. Arthur watched from a Medicaid ward as his district burned. Through the window, he could see Valkyries strafing hab blocks where cultists had barricaded themselves. He could hear the distinctive boom of bolt weapons as space marines. The Angels Sanguine had responded to the call, purged corruption with holy fury. The smoke rising from the lower levels carried the smell of burning flesh and dreams. The Inquisition was thorough but not clean. Every name on Arthur's list was tracked down, but so were their families, their friends, anyone who might have been tainted. The guilty died screaming. The innocent died quickly. In the grim calculus of the Imperium, it was better to kill 1,000 innocents than let one heretic escape. Maddie and Bailey had been evacuated to an ecclesiarchy shelter before the fighting began, a small mercy that Arthur had begged from the Inquisitor. They were safe but not unscathed. Everyone they'd known was dead or under interrogation. Their home was a crater. Their life was ash. On the third day, Inquisitor Amelia Vandyre visited him. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 30 standard years, with brown hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. Her rosette hung openly on her chest, the symbol of absolute authority that could condemn planets or save them. "Your investigation saved millions," she said without preamble. "The cult's plan would have succeeded without your warning. 17 worlds were set to burn. Now 17 cults are being systematically destroyed. The cost is acceptable." Her voice brooked no argument. "You've been exposed to knowledge that civilians shouldn't possess," Vandyre continued. "The nature of chaos, the corruption within imperial institutions, the weakness of our defenses. This knowledge is dangerous. I understand. We can modify your memories, remove the dangerous parts. You could return to your life, such as it is. Your family would be relocated, given new identities. You'd forget all of this." Arthur thought of Crindle's scarred face, of children training to kill, of priests bled out on profane altars. Or you work for us. The Ordo Hereticus needs investigators who can see what others miss, who understand that the enemy hides among us, wearing familiar faces, speaking familiar words. You've proven yourself capable. My family, they'd receive full honors, a pension, relocation to a safer world. You would cease to exist. Arthur Griffin would be dead. You'd become something else, a tool of the Inquisition. The choice was no choice at all. He'd seen what lurked in the shadows. He couldn't unsee it, couldn't pretend the danger wasn't real. Someone had to watch. Someone had to stand guard. "When do I start?" Vanda smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You already have." The farewell came at dawn, in the ruins of Chapel Imperator 7. The building had been damaged but not destroyed, its aquila still standing proud against the smoke-darkened sky. Maddie stood in her travelling clothes, their few remaining possessions in a single bag. Bailey wore her acolyte robes one last time, the white fabric stained with ash that wouldn't wash out. "The transport leaves in an hour," Arthur said. The words felt like broken glass in his throat. "I know." Maddie's voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "It's a desert world, they say, different from here. Better than here. Anywhere would be." She touched his face, memorizing it. "I knew this day would come. From the moment you started watching them, I knew. You can't help yourself. You see something wrong and you have to fix it no matter the cost." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It's who you are. It's why I love you." Bailey embraced him, fierce and desperate. "I'll never forget you." They prayed together one last time, their voices joining in the litany of fortitude. The words echoed in the ruined chapel, witnessed by broken statues and shattered windows. Then Arthur walked away, each step of his augmetic leg a countdown to separation. The black inquisitorial transport waited in what had been the market square. Other figures stood in its shadow, men and women who'd made the same choice, who'd looked into the abyss and decided to stand guard at its edge. They nodded to him as he approached, recognizing him as one of their own now. As the transport lifted away, Arthur watched his world shrink below. The cathedral still stood, its golden spires catching the first rays of sunlight through the smoke. The feast of the Emperor's Ascension would proceed as planned. The pilgrims would gather in their millions, and their prayers would rise to the golden throne unmarred by the screams of the dying. Crindle was dead, killed in the fighting when he tried to activate a suicide bomb in the cathedral. His cult was broken, its members dead or fleeing to other worlds where they'd be hunted in turn. The darkness had been pushed back. As long as men and women like Arthur stood watch, as long as ordinary citizens chose extraordinary sacrifice, as long as faith endured despite the horrors it faced, the Imperium would survive.